Hey, how's it going guys? Pen Gaming here with a Mythic Cahoon healing guide. This video should be helpful to anyone, but it's mostly aimed at a healer's role and specifically what they need to be doing throughout the Cahoon encounter. I should note that I made this guide prior to the recent nerfs to Cahoon, where there's 1 less boil to soak and 10% less add HP, which should definitely help to make the encounter easier from a healing perspective. However, our role as a healer remains very much the same, despite the changes. Anyway, let's jump right into it. Okay, so starting off with phase 1 here, the first thing I want to note is that I use prolonged power pre-pot over intellect, and the reason for that is that phase 1 is so insignificant in the greater scope of the fight that the cost saved is valuable, and while prolonged power also has the benefit of lasting for a whole minute compared to just the 30 seconds from the intellect pot, and it improves our survivability slightly. There isn't too much to note in this phase from the perspective of healing. It's very light on damage if your DPS are correctly interrupting and stunning the Cyclopean Terrors. The only time someone is in fear of dying is if a Cyclopean Terror gets a full channel off, or if people are accidentally tanking extra explosive corruptions. For this reason, our time in this phase is better spent on helping DPS down Cyclopean Terrors and spawns a Cahoon. For me as a monk, I try to apply my physical damage debuff to as many targets as I can. This is far more helpful than me overhealing people in the raid. So your main progression for phase 1 is going to be the people running the orbs getting a feel for the mechanic and consistently working to dunk both sides together. As you can see here, the healers try to get the Dark Bargain debuff just before the Dark Young dies. The reason for this is that the intermission is about to start, so if the orb runners have been doing their job correctly, the 25% buff to our healing will help with the output. And once we have attained the Dark Bargain debuff, we will start to work our way over to a central point where the raid will stack up for healing during the intermission. For us, we didn't necessarily have an assigned spot because this would vary greatly on the corruption on the ground, so we would just look out for a Wrestler Druid F-Flow, as she would be popping tree form here and be very visible for us to stack up on. Okay, so during the intermission phases, despite what people think, the healing intensity is actually quite low. This is where you will usually have your raid healing cooldowns used, as they'll be getting the most value from everyone being stacked up and from the constant ticking damage. For us, we had 2 raid healing cooldowns per intermission, then any number of darkness, rallying, cry as required. For this reason, the healing here is quite light and intermissions are usually a good spot to use our replenishment potion. You probably won't be needing to use it on the first intermission as the healing from P1 is very light, so I'd suggest for the second or third intermission. Try to coordinate with your other healers when you're using the replenishment potion so that you aren't all doing it together. It's important to not overheal these phases and to conserve your mana for later points in the fight that are more healing intensive. So upon entering phase 2, I'm first up on the left side to take the orb from halfway to the dunk point. I'm also in an even boil soak order, as you can see from the RT note on the left side of the screen, so I don't want to be soaking the first set of boils there. The raid moves into a central point in front of Cahoon to bait the blood feast. This shouldn't be soaked by everyone as we need to kill the ad, and the more people that are in the feast, the more HP it has. Once the ad is spawned, the healing intensity will ramp up a considerable amount. With the combination of the tanks getting trucked by the ad, the AoE interrupt, the wave of corruption, the boil ticking, and the people running the orbs, the healing will become a lot more difficult. This is a good spot where I'd recommend using your personal healing cooldowns, such as Avenging Crusader, and your personal damage reductions. It's very important that we avoid being interrupted by the ad's channel. You should have a weak aura that will sound off before it goes out so you can cancel your cast and wait for it to pass. While the damage is still difficult to heal through, we need to be actively looking out for boil soaks as well. This in my opinion is the hardest part of the fight to heal, and where you'll spend the majority of your progression as people are getting used to rotating boil soaks with the orb runners. Once the ad has been killed and the next set of boil soaked, we move back in together for the next blood feast. This one is soaked by everyone as the ad HP doesn't matter since it will be killed by the intermission beam. This is a good spot to stabilize the raid's HP before the intermission starts. Once the second intermission starts and the raid is adequately topped up, it's a good time to get some of the healers to use their replenishment potion, as the healing on the last intermission will be rougher than the second. I would aim to get at least 3 healers to drink on this one if they haven't on the previous, and have max 2 healers drinking on the final intermission. So once the intermission ends, the secondary part of phase 2 begins. This is very much similar to the previous part, so it doesn't need to be explained too much. This is a repeat of the processes we've already been doing, coordinating our boil soaks and the orb runners doing their job. For us, this part was particularly challenging as there is a lot of raid damage going out when I have to be up on the platform to dunk the orb. I try to burn as much mana as I can before I transcendence up to help the other healers stabilize the raid. This will be the final orb run before we begin our transition into phase 3. So the third intermission phase is where you want to make sure every healer has used their potion of replenishment. Much like the other intermissions, the raid cooldown usage here will carry the brunt of the healing requirements. For us, it's a little bit tougher because I was running the orb prior to the start of the intermission, which has put a bit more pressure on the other healers. Before the end of the intermission and start of the collapse, we want to make sure we are grouped up in a good position to bait the first collapse location. Once the first collapse has been baited on the marked spot, we want to move over to the next mark. Try to pump out spots of healing here in the 2 to 3 second window before the collapse knocks the raid back. This is a great time for raid-wide healing such as Essence Font, since the group will be stacked up and you'll be able to use it on the move. You'll likely have healing raid cooldowns assigned to this part of the encounter to help stabilize the raid before entering the final phase. We had our Disc Priest barrier on the final collapse hit and my revival to top up the raid heading into our phase 3 positions. So the first thing to note for phase 3 is the raid's positioning around G'huun. We had our healers somewhat spread out evenly, with the tank healers, myself and the Holy Pally, in the north of the room, standing beside the tanks. We had our priests and rest of the druids spread evenly at the back south side of the room, with the majority of the ranged DPS, as they would be doing the most amount of raid healing during this phase. It's worth noting to remember as a healer in this phase is that the damage starts out slow. Don't overheal and burn your mana right away. Remember, the damage will ramp up quite fast as the higher our wave of progression stacks go, so you'll want to conserve your mana pool for spamming later in the phase. Our job on the boil soaks remains the same as the other phases. However, the earlier we can pick up a soak the better, as we will need to focus on healing more towards the end of phase 3 than at the start, and this allows the DPS to just focus on doing damage while Bloodlust is active. A good thing to remember is that as a healer, we can have our back turned to G'huun and continue healing. I did this a lot during our early progression, as there is so much you need to focus on during the last phase that keeping my back turned means I don't need to worry about spinning around for the fear. During the end of the encounter, this is particularly useful, since our eyes will be glued on the raid frames as we are pumping our heals to keep people alive. Triage healing becomes very important towards the end of the encounter, as we won't be able to keep people topped up. Just focus on keeping the lowest HP players alive and moving on to the next person that is in fear of dying. This is a race to kill G'huun before the raid rots down from the wave of corruption stacks. My biggest piece of advice for this phase is to just take a deep breath and stay calm. The mechanics individually really aren't too difficult to handle in this phase, it's more so that it's 7 minutes of work prior to this point every attempt, and people in the raid will undoubtedly be feeling emotional, fatigued, and a bit desperate to just get the fight over with. We just need to relax, not worry about what other people are doing, just focus on our own individual role in this phase, keep an eye on the boss's mechanic countdowns as we prepare for what is coming and adjust accordingly. This fight isn't easy guys, be prepared to spend a few weeks progressing and wiping to it, however if we break it down and focus on our job individually, we will go a long way to making it less painful than it needs to be. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for today. Hopefully this was helpful to you in some way. If you have any other questions regarding the fight or healing in general, feel free to drop a comment down below and I'll respond as best I can. I also stream my Mythic raids with my guild on Twitch. The link will be in the description below if you're interested in that or want to ask me a question live. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.